We ran through the woods as fast as we could and made it to the raft in about 15 minutes. We had our bathing suits on under our clothes, so we stripped off our shirts and shorts and left them in two separate piles about 4 feet from the edge of the water. We untied the raft from the tree, grabbed the branch paddles, and cast off. We tried to move rapidly to the point beyond the contents of our map since we didn't really have that much time to waste. We knew that we were slower in the raft than on land, and that we would be in the raft for quite a while after the cutoff, since the woods were still too thick by the river to walk through, and it wasn't a place to dock. This meant that we would have to ride the raft back and forth from the original docking site, even if we did find a new place to leave it later on. After we passed the last charted part of our map, the water began to get way too deep for us to use our branches, so we had to lay on our stomachs and paddle with our hands. It was getting darker, and, as a result, it was becoming harder to distinguish the trees from one another, and we were both getting a little uneasy. In the interest of making good time, we tried to paddle as fast as we could, and it made a lot of noise since we were essentially just splashing. During these periods, we could both hear crunching of dead leaves and the snapping of fallen sticks in the woods to our right. As we would slow our pace and quiet our actions. The rustling in the woods would cease, and we'd wonder if we ever actually heard it at all. We didn't know what kind of animals were this far in the woods, but we didn't really want to find out. As Josh was adjusting the map, I was illuminating with a lighter, and we were suddenly confronted with the fact that the sounds were not imagined. They kept getting louder, too. It seemed to be moving slightly away from us, pushing through the woods just beyond our map. It was too dark to see, so neither of us had any idea what could have been there. Nervously, I called out, "Hello?" There was a moment of tension, both of us just sitting there, static in the water, until Josh started laughing.
Hello?
So what?
Yeah, hello, Mr. Monster in the Woods. I know you're sneaking around, but maybe you'll answer to my hello. Hello?
I realized how stupid it was. Whatever animal it wouldn't respond. I hadn't even realized I said it until afterwards, but if anything was actually there, I obviously wouldn't get a reply. The two of us started laughing and calling out hello in ridiculous voices. We continued mocking each other, and we were in the process of turning the raft around to head back when we heard it. It sounded like a voice saying hello. It was whispered and forced, like it was powered by the last breath in a pair of dying lungs, but it didn't sound sickly. It had come from a spot just off the map, which now sat behind us since we turned the raft around. I slowly shifted on the raft and faced the direction of the sound. I fumbled with a Roman candle. I needed to see.
What are you doing?
I had already lit it when he said it. As the sparking fuse sunk into the wrapper, I held it towards the sky. I had never actually shot one of those things by myself, so I thought to just use it like a signal flare. A glowing green orb rocketed out, flying towards the stars and extinguishing itself. I lowered my arm more towards the horizon. I could remember that there were several colors, but I didn't remember how many times they would fire before they were depleted. A second ball of red light burst out and fizzled above the trees, but I still didn't see anything.
Let's just go, man.
At that point, Josh had turned around and started paddling desperately. Just one more. Lowering my arm directly at the woods in front of me, another red ball of fire was launched from the tube, exploding in a big ball of light when it hit a tree. I still couldn't see anything. I dropped the firework in the river and watched as one more struggling fireball burst free, only to quickly die, suffocating in the water. As we began paddling in the direction of my house, we heard a loud rustling that wasn't trying to go unnoticed anymore. The breaking of branches and the trampling of fallen leaves overpowered the sound of our splashing. Somebody was running. In our panic, we jostled the raft too violently, and I felt one of the ropes under my chest loosen. "Josh, be careful!" By then, it was too late. The raft was breaking apart. Before too long, it had completely destroyed itself. We each held onto a separate piece of styrofoam, but the pieces weren't big enough to keep us afloat, and our legs dangled beneath us in the winter water. "Josh, quick!" I pointed at the water right next to him. He scrambled, but it was too cold to move quickly, and we both watched the map float away.
I'm cold, man. Let's just get out of the water.
We approached the shore, but each time we attempted to pull ourselves up, we would hear the rustling thundering towards us from the woods just above. Eventually, we were too cold and weak to even try anymore. Steadily, we kicked our legs and found ourselves nearing the dock site. We toppled off the debris and tried to pull it in on land, but Josh's piece had already slipped away and floated in the direction of the lake. We took off our swimsuits and were desperate to get into dry clothes. I slid into my shorts, but there was something wrong. I turned to Josh. "Where's my shirt?" He looked confused.
Maybe it got knocked into the water and floated into the lake.
I told Josh to go back to my house and to say that we were playing hide and seek if my mom was home. I had to try to find my shirt. I ran behind the houses and peered out over the water and scouted along the shoreline. It occurred to me that with luck, I could find the map too. I was moving pretty fast because I needed to get home, and I was about to call it quits when my concentration was interrupted by a sound coming from just behind me. I whipped around and saw that it was Mrs. Maggie. I had never seen her at night before, and in the poor light, she looked exceedingly frail. The usual warmth that wrapped her manner seemed to have just been snuffed out by the chill. The two of us made small talk for a minute or two. She called me Chris. Jokingly, I asked her if she was going to invite me in for a snack, but she said maybe another time. I was too busy looking for my map and the shirt to really engage her, but she sounded happy, so I didn't really feel bad about it. She said a few other things, but I was too distracted to pay any attention. I said goodnight and ran down her driveway towards my house. Behind me, I could hear her walking across the frozen yard, but I didn't turn around to wave. I had to get home. Thankfully, I made it home a few minutes before my mom did. By the time she came in with Josh, I had already changed clothes and warmed up. We had gotten away with it, even though we did lose the map in the process.
Couldn't find it?
Nah, but I saw Mrs. Maggie. She called me Chris again. I'm telling you, dude, just be glad you've never seen her at night. He both laughed, and he asked me if she invited me in for a snack, joking that the snacks must be really bad if she couldn't even give them away. I told him that she didn't, and he was surprised, actually. And now that I had time to think about it, so was I. It seemed that every time we had seen her, she had invited us in for snacks. And the one time that I, albeit sarcastically, invited myself, she said no. As Josh talked more about Mrs. Maggie, I suddenly realized that the lighter might still be in my pocket and that it would be disastrous if my mom found it. I grabbed the shorts off the floor and patted the pockets. I felt something, but it wasn't the lighter. From the back pocket, I slid out a folded piece of paper and my heart leapt. The map? But I watched it float away. However, it wasn't the map. As I unfolded the paper, my stomach turned as I tried to process what I was seeing. Drawn on the paper inside of a large oval were two stick figures holding hands. One was much bigger than the other, but neither had faces. The paper was torn, so part of it was missing, and there was a number written near the top right corner. It was either 15 or 16. I nervously handed the paper to Josh and asked him if he had put it in my pocket at some point, but he scoffed at the idea and asked why I was so upset. I pointed towards the smaller stick figure and what was written right next to it. It was my initials. I shook it off and told Josh the rest of the conversation between Mrs. Maggie and I. I had always attributed the odd exchange to her being sick until revisiting the events much later. As I think about it now, the feeling of sadness for Mrs. Maggie returns, but is augmented by a looming feeling of despair when I think about why she said, maybe another time. I knew what she had said, but I didn't understand what it meant that night. I didn't understand what her words meant weeks later when I watched men in strange orange suits carry what I thought were big black bags full of garbage out of her house, or why the whole neighborhood smelled like death that day. I still didn't understand when they condemned the house and boarded it up a little bit before we moved. But I understand now. At this point, I understand why her last words to me were so important, even if neither of us realized it at the time. Mrs. Maggie had told me that night that Tom had come home, but I now know who really moved in. I also know now why I never saw her body being brought out on a stretcher. Those bags weren't filled with garbage.